The Hedgeless Horseman here. I thought I'd make a short video on Line 1 Metals, a recap if you will, why I am very bullish on this company. And first off, let's look at a segment from the latest corporate update.
In middle of 2019, we ended up getting the rest of the Caldera, the other 2/3 of the Caldera, which we originally applied for back in 2013 and then 2014. We wanted the whole Caldera because the whole Caldera was the important part of making the big picture. And that's what really created the momentum, the impetus for us to move forward, because the first time in the history of the project that one company had held the whole Caldera and we could actually carry out systematic exploration within the whole area. The direction of the company over the next year or so is going to be twofold. Firstly, we want to accelerate our deep diamond drilling for proof of concept. We already know the mineralization extends down to 300, 400, 500 meters and is still just as good at that depth as what it is near the surface. Typically, alkaline deposits extend down to 1,000, 1,500 meters. We have a spectacular amount of geochemical anomalies that are waiting to be tested. So secondly, in the drilling, will be to target some of those anomalies.
Let me describe what CSAMT is first of all. It's an electrical technique. So you basically put in electromagnetic waves into the ground. This technique actually allows us to see down into the ground upwards of about 1.2 kilometers. What you're seeing here is more or less an east-west section through the Tuvatu lodes. The Tuvatu lodes are these guys right here. These are the block models for the lode system. They've been drilled from surface down to about 350 meters of depth. The whole image from top to bottom is a little over a kilometer. This is our lode network. It's like branches of a tree. You can see how all of these branches are converging, and they ultimately look like they converge on this resistive structural feature that extends down into the ground. That now is our target. That's where we think we can find, a high-grade root feeder structure. Right there, you can see another double or potentially triple to the system with depth.
So, that of course sounds very good, and the thing is, which I like about Line 1, is that everything is basically pointing towards those bullish comments being right. And there's a bunch of evidence that basically paints a picture that this could really be one huge, potentially tier 1 deposit. First of all, here we got a simple slide of some geomapping, as well as some of the prospects, and the monzonite, which is the unit in red, and Navilava monzonite is the primary host of the gold, as far as I can tell, or if I understand it correctly. And you can see prospects. They're scattered over a 7-kilometer strike here. So again, which Steven touched on in the corporate presentation, it took them about 7 years to consolidate this caldera. So when you think about that, as soon as they consolidated this entire caldera, the value proposition for the company totally changed, obviously. And granted, the share price has been heading higher, and it's higher than it was before. Do I think it totally reflects the risk reward on this particular project? Not in my opinion, not given the fact that it's de-risked by having a mining lease, which you can see here, and a high grade resource which shows very high IRR, especially at these prices. On paper it basically justifies more than the current market cap, and that's of course the start. So here are some of the clues why this system looks to be potentially huge. These are Bleg samples, which basically hints where there's potentially gold-bearing loads around. And as you can see, it's a very large area. I mean, this is 2.5 kilometers, and there are a few places that lights up here. And what's even more interesting is that it seems to go beyond that. It seems to be going beyond the rim of the crater, basically. Here they have a prospect called LIO.V, for example. And I mean, if you look at some of the numbers that they've basically trenched all around the caldera, almost 1 meter 20 grams, 6 meters 3.85, including 1 of 10, 1 meter 5, 2.58, 35. You can see, I mean, it's most of the stuff is around 1 meter plus, and I mean there are some really high numbers, of course. I mean, to find a few rock chip samples or whatever, but to have this amount of channel samples with this high grade, I mean, I'm not a geologist, but that tells me that if they are finding those kind of numbers around the caldera, I mean, why on earth would the system not potentially be as big as both the Bleg and the channel samples basically suggest? And the sub 1 million ounce current deposit that's centered around here, and it's I don't know, drilled to 350 meters or whatever. I mean, they expect that these systems extend to plus 1 kilometers at depth, like it does in other alkaline systems like Cripple Creek or Porgera, etc. So I mean, basically just experience with these systems suggests that they should go a lot deeper. So there should be plenty of potential just within the Tuvalu resource area. So if we're talking perhaps 3 times the potential at depth, then you have to multiply it with the lateral potential as well. So I mean that becomes a quite magnificent multiplier effect, because if it's 3 times potentially 3 times as deep, and if it's potentially, I don't know, how much bigger is this than this? Well, I don't want to put numbers on it, but obviously there's looks to be quite some lateral potential as well. And we've heard Quinton say that he thinks basically the mothership, if you will, is probably located further to the north. So this would just be the southern, basically southern end of the system, which of course is also suggested by these Bleg samples. And here you have some of the CSAMT slides, and I mean, it does line up with the CSAMT results, that you had a feeder or two here. Potentially, I mean, I might be wrong on the technical term, but I think you know what I mean. So this is striking like this, and here you have the Tuvalu deposit, and as Quinton said, there's like branches that are, it blossomed out further up, and then when they drill deeper, hopefully we'll find some very high grade feeders where these come together basically. So this is left to drill. Then I mean, this is an untested target, this is an untested target. Already have confirmed gold here as well. And then we have the verified profile for line 1, which I find quite interesting. Here you can see basically the modern caldera, and here you have a bunch of targets. One thing that is suggestive of where there mineralized rocks for in an alkaline system is where there's potassium, and potassium radiometrics is one tool to help map stuff like that, which might have been impregnated by alkaline fluids. So you can obviously see that the footprint is pretty large, and this is the Tuvalu deposit. So it's around here. You can see that, I mean, it basically trends off to the north here and to the east as well. Again, I mean, what kind of percentage does the current deposit take up of the radiometrics? Then we have the Blegs on top of that. Sure enough, basically it correlates with the potassium readings. And here we have a bunch of rock and channel samples. So I mean, there's obviously more gold than this little thing here, and as you can see, I mean, think about again the lateral potential, and then you multiply it by the depth potential. That this, for example, the Tuvalu lode might, who knows, go as far down as here or whatever, and this might as well, and to the north you have even more stuff. And then we can layer on the CSAMT readings. I mean, not an expert on this, but it's obvious that this basically correlates with this thing here, and it seems to be striking, you know, bam, bam, perhaps something here. And if you flip it around, you see this thing here to the north. We're looking south basically now, so I don't know what this is, but and this one and here, I mean there's suggested to be quite a few feeder zones potentially, and I think they're gonna do even more CSAMT work. I mean, this was just a blind effort, if you will, to try and see where the plumbing might be. And as you can see, it trends off here basically, potentially turns like this. And of course it can go even further down than this, but this is how deep the CSAMT reached. And again, is it a coincidence that the deepest readings were to the north, where there was where Quinton expected there to be some sort of mothership, and this happens to have the most profound and deep-seated anomaly? I don't think so. I don't think that's a coincidence. So anyway, again, I mean, there's too much stuff lining up, in my opinion, for it. I mean, to me, it's beyond any doubt that this system will be proven to be much larger than one lode, reaching 350 meters down. I mean, I guess I would say that the only thing, like with line 1, is that I'm pretty impatient. I mean, it looks like they could be drilling for years and still find more gold, and that's obviously a very luxurious problem to have. That's not many juniors I can say that about, that I would consider them to have probable upside and huge potential at the same time. I mean, they're obviously grassroots explorers, which could, I mean, if they're drilling a porphyry or whatever, of course it could be very huge, but I mean, based on everything that is known already and mapped, and mapped by geophysics and channel samples and vertical CSAMT readings, etc. I mean, there's so much stuff lining up basically that in my opinion, it makes this to be one of the most probable upside scenarios for any junior I know of, because sure, if there's only the potassium or the only ship samples or only Bleg samples, but if you line up everything and everything is telling the same story basically, then I think it's pretty rational to start to believe that, okay, if everything is pointing towards the same thing, then maybe that thing is the most probable thing, which in this case means that the system ought to be multiples larger than the current resource. And I don't know if there are a bunch of juniors out there that have a project of this scale, which with this amount of factors that are pointing towards exploration success being probable and not potential, and not only that the potential is also obviously massive. I mean, we're not talking about, okay, maybe they can find 2 million ounces or whatever. I mean, they've already said that, their first aim, they're gonna try to prove up that this is a 5 million ounce plus system, and I believe them. I don't think that's impossible at all. So if I would just summarize basically why I like Line 1 metals, and I've written a lot about this. I want to have an investment case as simple as possible, because I'm looking for no-brainers basically, and some of the most important factors are all checked with Line 1 in my opinion. Anything can go wrong. This is the mining business and there are no guarantees, and that goes for any stock in any sector. But if we just look at the people, for example, which I find most important because I'm not a geologist or a mining engineer. So we got the geologist, Quinton Henney and Stephen Mann. Both highly successful people who have worked for some of the biggest mining companies in the world. And of course we have our successful businessman in Wally Berikoff, who has made some big sales in the past. billion-dollar deals basically. So if there was anyone I would think could build a company and sell it for a lot more money in the future, I guess it would be Wally. And then we have the project. First of all, the fact that it has probable upside. That's not a lot of juniors that can say the same. They don't have everything lining up like Line 1 has, in my opinion. And also added bonus, which should not be understated, that not only is their probable upside, but the blue sky upside, the potential is huge. These systems can be up to, these alkaline systems can be up to 40 million ounces. So I have no idea where the basically, sky is the limit until further notice. It will of course take time, but that's also one of the things I like, because I like to find a position I can basically, or a company that I can buy a position and basically just, float along in with the ups and downs in the market, etc. I see years of drilling in this slide, for example. So in that case, they won't hit on every hole, of course, but if they would just go about what they're doing now basically, and if I would check in 2 years down the road, I would be surprised if they hadn't perhaps, I don't know, added in further resources of a few million ounces perhaps. And that's not a lot of companies I can say the same, that I see them having a project that, okay, if I did nothing and just came back in 2 years, that I would expect their flagship project to still be, growing, if you know what I mean, with still room left to run. That's not a lot of juniors, again, I can say that about, but not a lot of juniors have an alkaline gold systems, and I mean, pretty much Line 1 is pretty much the one of few, if not the only one with a, proven high quality alkaline gold system and controlling the whole thing. I mean, I think this thing will be bought sometime, because just looking at this makes it suggestive to me that there's potentially a long lived mine in this slide. And we know with the basically the decline in major discoveries, with every passing year, a tier 1 asset is only gonna go up in value for the major mining companies, because most of them are built on tier 1 assets, and they're not finding more tier 1 assets at the same pace that they are mining them out. And then, of course, an added bonus, which I've lately been trying to focus even more on, is the margin of safety aspect. That if you're gonna compound your investments, that means that a permanent loss is something you would like to avoid like the plague. So thankfully, Line 1 Metals has meat on the bones. They have a resource, they have an economic study done on it, they have a fully permitted project. So they already have stuff that would take most juniors at least a couple of years to do. So they're already way more advanced than 95% of the juniors. Their project potential is beyond 99.9 of the juniors, and probable upside that I think that sure, blue sky might not materialize, but do I think that this will at least grow for at least some time going forward, and prove up a few million ounces more at least? Yeah, I think that's very high. So you get, in my opinion, Line 1 was one of the few companies that I basically slammed the table on when I started digging into it, because I hadn't seen this kind of factors coming together, that you got both the people in the project and a project with probable upside. Blue sky that is unparalleled except for a few, I guess, juniors out there. And then add fully permitted project with high IRR, etc. So, and then you obviously they're cashed up as well. So just to sum up, I think it's pretty I think it's pretty clear and easy to see why I consider Line 1 Metals to be one of the best risk rewards out there, period. And that was also why I was happy to have them on as a sponsor, because I obviously want to be connected to stories I think really have merit and are really good. And if I wouldn't be willing to invest in them, then I don't want to have them on as a sponsor, basically. So it was an easy decision. I owned Line 1 before they became a sponsor, and I visited the project. Great people. It's they got a lot of locals working for them, and they seem competent. And it looks like they have a great team in place. And when you got Wally Berkoff as the captain, that's just looking at his history. Usually he's able to steer some pretty large ships to the right direction, and which mostly have ended up being sold for 500 to 1.5 billion dollars basically. Anyway, that was it for now, and I'm anxious to see them drill even more. I mean, that's the only thing. I'm just rolling my thumbs basically, and waiting for them to really show proof of concept as they described in the video, because if it also becomes, I mean, obvious that the CSAMT readings are successfully able to delineate the I would guess the position of the loads, and that they go as deep as the CSAMT readings suggest, and again, I mean, then you just de-risk it even further, and then you can really start to believe that the lateral times vertical potential is more probable than before. And in that case, I mean, who knows how much the implied value of line 1 will jump. Anyway, a lot of interesting stuff coming together, and I mean, always do your own due diligence. I'm biased simply because I'm a shareholder, as well as some family members are shareholders as well, and they are a banner sponsor. So, I mean, make your own conclusions. I'm just sharing my personal opinions basically. Thanks guys.